Okay, so for those of you who followed up to watch part 2 of the series, thank you very much. I really appreciate your watching. In this part, what I'm going to do is make reference to a pop culture document that I feel is a spectacular exemplar of introverted feeling in action. And I'm going to point out to you, with reference to this video and the behavior and speech in it, I'm going to point up for you specific moments where different aspects of introverted feeling can be seen and heard objectively. And I think that's I hope it'll be interesting, since there seems to be quite a lot of confusion, understandable confusion, as to what introverted feeling is and what it does and what it looks like. I hope that this exercise is going to be useful for people, to help them recognize, to better understand what introverted feeling is about, but also to recognize it in action. It is a lot less showy than extroverted feeling is, most of the time, until it isn't. Though it's a very different animal. What is the case for introverted feeling as a function, as a cognitive function, as is the case for from at least most, if not all, of the other 3 cognitive functions with an introverted attitude, is that it's sort of action, if you like, is very under the radar until it isn't, and then it's very prominent and it's right in your face. In the case of especially introverted feeling, I would say, because of its role as a judging function, a decision-making function, that definitely suggests action. It suggests movement and action and doing. So that is indeed the case. Introverted feeling will cause the possessor of that cognitive function to do some things that really stand out sometimes, and that can win that person accolades and a sort of an estimation of their of what they're doing as heroic. But it can also, and probably a lot more often, since we don't have a need for heroes all day, every day, and since a lot of heroes are not, in fact, welcomed by everyone. Like, they really think of anyone who's ever made any major change in the world in terms of social reform, political reform of any kind. These are not generally people that everybody, where the approval and like of that person was unanimous, shall we say. Because when you're changing things and reforming things, change is difficult. It's difficult, and not everybody likes to do it. So, and it's very understandable why. But very often people who have FI in prominence in their cognitive function stack are playing some very prominent roles at the head of any sort of movements for change. Not always, but very often. So, all right, where was I? So this example, this document that I've chosen, is an example of sort of FI in an accurate, but also in one of its better lights, when FI is really shining. And I think it's really, like, FI gets a lot of a bad rap sometimes, so I think it's really important to show FI in the positive sense, so that heavy FE users in particular, who don't seem to really, many of whom don't seem to understand it at all and appreciate it even less, they might get a better understanding as to what role it has to play in society and for the healthy functioning of any society. So here comes a very good example of that. Now, I thought of this because it's I just finished doing a series this week that involved a document sort of comparing or talking about the dynamics that there can be between INFJ and ENFP. And it was an interview on the Late Late Show being done by ENFP Craig Ferguson with an INFJ actress. And I return here again to Ferguson for this part 2 of this series, because I think after you've seen this document and after I've gone through it with you, you're going to understand. If any of you have had any doubts as to whether Craig Ferguson could be anything but an ENFP, I don't think you're going to have any doubts at the end of it, or I'll be very surprised if people do. I know that a lot of people think that he very well might be an ENTP. And it is true that he does share, ENFP shares a lot of characteristics with ENTP. We have the same dominant function of extroverted intuition, which is a very out there, it's very hard to ignore. Extroverted intuition, when it's doing what it does, tends to make for some very chatty, very energetic, very exploratory and experimental people. Who push a lot of limits and disrupt a lot of things, and are very interested in novelty and exploration in the external world, in the objective world. So it gets a lot of attention, and again, for better and worse, it gets a lot of attention, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing. Here's why I am not going to be believing anybody. I mean, I do welcome the objection. I welcome any comments I get. I very much appreciate anyone paying attention to these videos. So, and I appreciate what people have to say, and I'd like to learn. So if anyone has any anything they want to comment on, please go ahead and do it. Please do. But here's why it's going to take nothing less than Craig Ferguson being quoted from a very reliable source as coming out and saying that no, I am an ENTP, or I am a whatever other than ENFP. It will take nothing less than that to convince me that he's not an ENFP, and I'm going to show you why. This document is a monologue that he did in 2007 on his show that is absolutely rife with FI specifically. That really, to me, it was obvious that the minute I saw the guy being himself on that show, so many years ago, I immediately recognized him as someone belonging to my type, and I just was like, there's this. But this is what I think really, really settles it. This FI, this extremely prominent FI. Some of you who may have seen my other video on. If you want my series, my 4-part series specifically about ENFP, saying, the first 2 videos being entitled, "If you want our best, you'll have to deal with the rest." Anyway, somewhere in that series, I did say, I was talking about why ENFP, very, very often the auxiliary function in ENFP, which is introverted feeling, that which is this whole video series presently is about, is very often overshadowed by the very showy and loud and out there and ebullient extroverted intuition, which is the dominant function in ENTPs and ENFPs. And that the workings, the very important and crucial and influential workings of introverted feeling in ENFP are very hard to see in most cases. And if you do see them, it's very hard to sort of put them in their proper context and interpret them correctly, what they mean and what their real sort of interplay and influence with other parts of the personality type are. And one thing anyway, if you'd like, I suggest you go look at that video if you're interested in the ENFPs, you're interested in hearing more about that. But one of the things I did say in there is that, we ENFPs, we're not nearly as confused as other people are about this really rather strange combination of dominant function and auxiliary function that you have in this type that are really quite at odds with one another in many respects. And when it comes to, putting them in action in concert in day-to-day life, there can be a lot of conflict and a lot of internal conflict that an ENFP experiences. However, it is the case, though, that the issue of these 2 cognitive functions that are very prominent in ENFP, we as ENFPs feel them all the time, and for us, they're not foreign. I mean, they are a handful. They are really hard to reconcile, when they're at loggerhead, sort of the kind of intentions, if you like. And that's a bit sloppy of me to say, but their influences put the person who possesses that personality type in conflict with him or herself to an extent. Difficult decisions and compromises have to be made to kind of work it out. And but here's the thing. I think tell me if I'm wrong, other ENFPs who are watching this, but I suspect I'm in good company with other ENFPs in saying that for me, this sort of issue of the extroverted intuition dominant function in my cognitive function stack, and then the very different kind of issue of my introverted feeling auxiliary function in that stack, each one is ready to come out at any time. It's not like I'm not aware of both of them all the time. I have to live with the influence of both of them all the time. It's an integral part of my subjectivity and part of FI, CF, the part one of this video series, plus a bunch of other videos I've made. FI is causes you to feel things very, very deeply. It causes you to have a value system that you have to attend to many times a day, whether you like it or not. You are always checking in with it and sort of seeing how your behavior and your situation is aligning with that value system. And if there's a misalignment, there's going to be an enormous amount of tension that the heavy FI user will experience until that is sorted out and reconciled. So, that's something that we grapple with all of the time. But it might surprise other people to see, the influence of one function coming out in an obvious way one day, and then not so long after see the very different influence of the other one coming out. And some people might be really surprised by it, or might disbelieve what there is before their eyes, because they just can't make sense of it. It seems so disparate and such a strange combo that they don't really get it. Well, I think this document is one in which you really see that. You see it in a very objective way. You see an ENFP doing both, doing extroverted intuition, and doing introverted feeling at the same time, and in a way that is very organic and integrated and smooth and positive, and exerting a really positive influence in the world, doing something really cool. So without further ado, let me introduce what the document is. It was a monologue done by Craig Ferguson on his Late Late Show in 2007, ages ago. And it seems that, and I remember I saw it when it was the night that it was actually of the original broadcast. I happened to see it, and it really floored me. And that's too when I was already convinced, but I mean, this just absolutely sealed the deal for me, that I was like, oh, that's an ENFP. Like, only an ENFP would do this way. I'll show you what I mean by that. What he was doing is he gave this monologue that was very surprising and made a lot of headlines at the time, in which he went into this very heartfelt personal story of how how it came to be that he began to recover from alcoholism. And he starts it off talking about morality in a way that is very friendly to his audience and to anyone who might be listening. It's not threatening or upsetting, or, again, it's not any of those things that FI gets such a terrible rap for a lot of the time. It's pure FI, but it's FI at its absolute best, really, or among its best. Where it is doing something that's having a very strong impact on people in a moral sense, in a positive sense, in a compassionate sense. That's one of the cherished FI values of his that is being transmitted and exemplified in a really beautiful way in this monologue. And he makes reference to, at the time, Britney Spears had just kind of really lost it in public, and had been going into rehab, and had been doing some stuff that the paparazzi had been documenting and publishing all over the place, and it must have been very embarrassing for her in some ways. She got some tattoos, she shaved her head, there were pictures of it all over the place. All the news outlets and the entertainment outlets were yakking about it, and something about it really got to Craig Ferguson, and so he decided to do this monologue. Now, the monologue is, I've included a link in the description box of this video below, so you can actually watch and listen to that original monologue. And then if you click in the lower left, just below the screen, the inset screen that's inside that link, you can also take a look at the transcript of everything that he says if you want to revisit. And that's what I'm going to be, as I make this video, I'm going to be referring to it and going through it bit by bit and talking about where the different aspects of FI are coming out like crazy in this thing. This very rather beautiful moment in, cheesy late night TV. It really had an impact. It had a real impact. And again, that's what FI at its best, what it does. As I said at the end of my 4-part series, apples to orange, introvert feeling, apples to oranges. FI at its best is heroic. It might be a bit much to call this monologue heroic, a bit pretentious. However, there's no question that it was Craig Ferguson using his auxiliary function of introverted feeling in a very positive way that had, because of his the rest of his personality and his doings and his attitude and his big public platform where it was appropriate to share this very FI inflected story, very FI originated story in many important respects, it was able to exert a very positive influence on people. And here we go. So I'm going to take a look at the transcript, and let's look at that. There we go. All right. So he starts off by saying, "For me." Okay. The first two words of this part of this monologue, after he's made a departure from his opening, getting the show ready, getting the audience warmed up and ready for the rest of the show. For me, again, what's FI all about? Individualism. It's not all about individualism at the expense of the group. That is only in the case, when there is a drastic contest between when one is put, an FI user is put in such a situation where a choice has to be made, a very difficult choice has to be made, and also when and only when the internally developed, cherished, deeply felt, must be abided by value system of a heavy FI user the value system is in conflict with what's going on in the group that the heavy FI user is a part of. So caveat, this should be underlined. This should be underlined I believe, in every description of what introverted feeling is, because if you don't do that, it's going to lead to a great deal of misunderstanding and a misapportionment of what it is, what introverted feeling is, in essence. So he starts off by saying, for me, comedy should have a certain amount of joy in it. It should be, that's very ENFP, isn't it? Known for that, the cheerfulness. It should be about always attacking the powerful people, attacking the politicians and the Trumps and the blowhards and the go after them. Now, so right out the gate, I can't think of a more FI bunch of things to say. What is FI all about? FI is about giving some attention to the underdog, according some importance to the underdog. It's about a sense of separation of oneself from the group, and it's also a very strongly, deeply heartfelt need to attend to the value system and to honor one's own internal value system. And again, if there's a contest between that value system and what's going on in the group, the value system has to be honored, no matter what it costs the person with FI in most cases. And for us, it's either going to cost our health from the extreme stress that we're going to feel on an ongoing basis if we go against that value system to just go along to get along with the group, or we're going to suffer the lumps and the potentially terrible consequences in terms of ostracism and privation of being cast out of the group by going against what the group wants. So in order to, not for nothing, not to be a troublemaker, not to get the attention, but rather to honor the value system. That is what the drive is about, fundamentally. He goes on to say, we shouldn't be attacking the vulnerable people. And I think this is totally a mea culpa. This is just for me. Again, very individualistic, very, very much saying, I'm just speaking for myself. Reference to the self. Reference to one's own deeply felt values. This is all extremely introverted feeling in content. I think my aim's been, so this is a totally mea culpa, it's not just for me. I think my aim's been off a bit recently. I want to change that a bit. So tonight, no Britney Spears jokes. And then he pauses and the audience laughs, because the audience is a little uncomfortable. Like they're used to him making them laugh, every whatever interval it is. But often, as he goes into it, he's a very funny man. It's an entertainment show. So the audience is laughing. And here's what's really interesting is here he is being very powerfully FI in what he's doing and what he's saying. But it's a very positive experience for everybody in there. I don't think the audience, you can tell that the audience is not, they're laughing readily. They're still very relaxed. They are with him. Okay. So this is, I think, a terrific example, because so much of the time when FI is being explored and examples are being given, the emphasis is put on how disruptive and inharmonious and attention seeking and rebellious and irritating and etc. that the FI user is. This is an example of someone being balls out FI and doing it in a way that is very good for the group and that the group appreciates. But it's still introverted feeling. So Here's exactly why. Britney Spears. And he's like, no, this is true this way. So here he is. He's seamlessly, like, you'll notice that he hasn't changed his demeanor. He hasn't, like, announced that he's going into a new thing. Because for him, as an ENFP, to be funny and jolly and all these other things that have to do with extroverted and that attend extroverted intuition, but also to be very deeply feeling and very emotionally sensitive and very values driven, very beholden to one's values, this just comes naturally to him because he's an ENFP. That's what we do. That's how we are, whether you see it or not all the time. Or you won't see it all the time. You'll see it in our actions downstream, in downstream effects. You won't be seeing what's going on with us all the time. But here is a real glimpse of an ENFP where you're seeing both those functions, and here they are. Like, they are operating in a really objectively observable way. So he begins to talk about his personal story. Again, very FI of him. And he's speaking about it in detail. He's speaking about it in a very warm way. There's emotion in it. It's not a sort of leaking all over the place kind of emotion, but it doesn't need to be, because he's getting into some very nitty-gritty detail in this monologue. Again, not extroverted feeling at all. Extroverted feeling would be very much more concerned with sort of generalities and the exterior and whatever. This is Craig Ferguson telling his own story in a great deal of detail, and he's letting it stand on its own. He's presenting it in a kind of take it or leave it kind of way, but in a very not in an in-your-face way that's abrasive or awful or offensive to the group. The group is with him in this, but he is separate from the group at the same time. And this is the more common experience of being a heavy introverted feeling user. The part that I don't hear being described nearly often enough is that most of the time, as we heavy FI users, we experience ourselves to be part of the group, and we are a part of the group, and we are a very beneficial part of the group, and we're all in. The difference is, though, is that the reason we are there and that we can persist in being there is because our value systems are aligned. And as long as they're aligned, you're going to be able to you can count on us to be in there, and really in there, because it's part of our values, to do well by the group in those situations most of the time. All right. Wow. I'm only one paragraph. I really better move this along. So he begins to tell this very detailed, heartfelt. It's very unvarnished. It's very natural. There's no pretense to it. I don't get any sense from what he's saying or how he's saying it or his body language. He's being very genuine. I mean, he's on stage, obviously, and he's aware of that, but he's telling the real story. I think this is the kind of story you could actually, I mean, I don't know. None of us can know, but I would guess that this is the kind of story that he would be telling in the rooms if he's in a 12-step program. This is the kind of story he would be telling, and the way he's telling it to this audience is not that different. That's very FI, this sort of unwavering fidelity to be authentic. The drive to be authentic is very, very strong in heavy introverted feeling users. All right, so let's move on into the thing. So he says, but what she's going through, Britney Spears and her sort of crazy weekend, what she's going through reminds me of what I was doing 15 years ago when he first got sober. Now, again, this is very SI of him. This is inferior SI in ENFP, looking to the past and considering and sort of having an attachment to certain key past events and ways of dealing with things. He's making reference to that there. I believe that to be inferior, perhaps at least inferior SI in action. When I was living like that. And then he says, then he comes into a bunch of qualifications. They're very individualistic, very sort of respectful of the very FI notion of, like, there's the individual, like there's you and there's me and we're separate, but I'm with you, but I'm making the choice to be with you. That is essentially what introverted feeling is about, is it's the choice. There's a choice to be made about joining with a group or not. So he says, I was living like that. Now, I'm not saying Britney Spears is an alcoholic. I don't know if she's an alcoholic or she's alcoholic or not. Pause. But she clearly needs help. And then the audience is laughing and laughing. And so it's taking a while for the audience. Like, he has seamlessly gone right into the FI, like this heavy, heavy stuff. But he's done it in such a lovely kind of way. And he's so relaxed about it. Because he's so authentic, he's relaxed about it. And so the audience is kind of lagging behind. They're kind of like, whoa, like I'm sure they don't really, and as an audience member too, you're like, wow, this is something different, like, so they're still laughing. And he's not. And you'll notice that he's being very respectful to the audience. They're out of alignment, again, because of his FI, right? They're out of alignment temporarily here. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. This is not a terrible thing. The audience is still very comfortable. They're for him. They're with him. They're paying attention. They're not upset. But, they're kind of lagging behind. They're kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? And he's like, oh, this is what's going on. Here you go. Very FI, very authentic. She clearly needs help. Now, what I do here is I speak for myself. Again, emphasis on the individual, very FI. The speculation, there's always been speculation that if you're on television, that somebody's behind it, the corporation, the production people. He says, this is me, all right? It's you and me, all right? I'm trying to be honest with you. I'm not. So again, this really strong emphasis on the unvarnished authenticity, very compassionate and warm connection, and that has to do with the configuration of FI within the ENFP personality cognitive stack. So he's in other words, he's like, here we are, you're this huge crowd, and then there's me. But it's as if he as one is speaking to each one in the audience, because that's the point of view that you naturally have and that you involuntarily have if you're a heavy FI user, is that a group is made up of individuals. So this is him invoking a very FI kind of understanding of social relations. He's like, I'm talking to you, me, not we are all one together, and it's just assumed without any negotiation that we are all always and forever one unit together, which would be much more the extroverted feeling, typical kind of attitude in general. All right. So there he is. He's talking to everyone as if they are an individual. I'm trying to be honest with you. I'm not an expert, but I am an expert on my own story. I was there when it happened, and then he goes on to describe it. He makes some people laugh, but again, he makes people laugh by telling very authentically telling the details of his real story. So I'll just go through some of that. Yeah. It's a great, sorry, I'm just enjoying it too. It's a great monologue. So so there he goes. Within a matter of 2 or 3 paragraphs, he goes in this monologue, and I suggest, spoiler alert, maybe watch the monologue in the link below before you continue to listen to what I'm saying, because I should have said that at the beginning. Do watch it, because here comes a big part of it. So within 2 paragraphs, he's gone in his opening monologue to begin his show, watched by millions on mainstream, on network television. He's talking about the time he was where he had a plan to kill himself. And he's not using any euphemisms to kind of soften it, he's like, I was going to kill myself that day. Now, this is not what people talk about usually on an entertainment show, right? People don't go right in and very so smoothly. And with the audience support, and with the audience coming along with him and supporting him in talking about this story. He's talking about killing himself. This does not happen every day on regular television. And you'll notice he is completely comfortable doing this. That is very introverted feeling. He's not like worried about, am I being received properly? Does everybody here like this, or does at least the majority like this, or whatever? It's not that he doesn't care. Heavy FI users really want to be liked too, very much. ENFPs are very motivated by being liked by a lot of people. But again, what makes us heavy FI users is if it comes to it, though. If it comes to winning a popularity contest or honoring a cherished value, there is no contest. We will honor the cherished value, and we will take whatever punishment or consequences there are for that. We have to. Is that because we're so wonderful, we're such heroes? No. It's because it would be even more painful for us to not do it. We are impelled to do it. Okay, so he continues to tell his rather interesting story in great unvarnished detail, but in a very relaxed way, about his plan to kill himself. what he was going to do, who said what. Like it's a very intimate kind of story. It's a kind of minute by minute, and this happened, I was thinking this, and so on. He really lets everybody into his mind, with the state of mind that he was in at that time. And there's no like cushioning or whatever. Like it's the real deal story here. I'm just going forward to the next part. Right, and that paragraph ends. And one thing led to another. The story about him getting sidetracked on the day he decided he would die, he would make that happen. And he talks about what happened, what transpired to take him off that course. And he said, one thing led to another, and I forgot to kill myself that day. I mean, woo! Not the most lighthearted affair, but he's doing it in the most graceful, beautiful, and funny way. It's fantastic. Yeah. So here's the important point. The alcohol saved my life. I was self-medicating. I'm an alcoholic. I needed alcohol. I needed something. And then he goes on, talks more about his experience. And again, it's very individualistic. It's very like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you what to think or what to do or to make of this, but this is my story. Individualistic in a very positive sense within this context. Talks about someone he met in rehab. Sorry for that I have to do this. I didn't have any other way to read this out except in this awkward fashion. I apologize to everybody. Okay, and then he makes a comment after telling a story about some things that happened in rehab, some people he met, and so on. He makes reference to a thing that was in the news at the time. The Reverend Ted Haggard, for example, when he gets out of the rehab and is cured of his gait. So he makes the side note. All of a sudden, he just veers off into this little, again, very NE of him, to veer off into something that's associated but not directly related to the story he's been telling in a lot of detail up to this point. So he's talking about this Reverend, the rehab, and is cured of his gayness. This is clearly, and he's talking about a criticism of, he just brings this right into it, this social critique. Again, no apologies whatsoever. Again, very direct, very raw, but beautifully done here. And it's perfectly introverted. This is exactly what introverted feeling can be. So he's doing a social critique of rehab programs that have the tendency to tell their patients that they do a 28 stint in there, and then they're cured, they're fine, and they don't need to worry about managing their disease anymore, their addiction anymore, or whatever it is, that the compulsion that they've been treated for during those 28 days. So he just goes and volunteers this, and again, he does it in a very, very graceful way, a critique of those programs. And he goes so far as to say at the end of this paragraph, as to those who sort of give their clients, their patients, a false sense of security, a false sense of having been cured, and that they're all done, their problems taken care of forever now. He says, this is clearly an unscrupulous bunch of people running that rehab. He's referring to rehab for gay people. I mean, that's, again, he makes no bones about it. He's not apologizing. He's not putting it into, terms that more people will like, who are homophobic or who, might have a vested interest in such a rehab center that does this kind of thing, or a philosophy that advocates for this kind of quick fix approach to serious problems like addiction. Like he's just going like, no, he's just telling his story. He's telling it like it is. The point I'm trying to make to you is this. Now I have been sober 15 years, blah, blah, blah. So again, it's very direct, very raw, very authentic. Blah, 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 more about that. Then he basically talks about circles back to Britney Spears that he started the monologue with, and talks about her situation. And he says, it looks to me a little bit that Britney Spears has a similar problem going on with alcohol to the one he has or had. This woman has 2 kids. She's 25 years old. She's a baby herself. She's a baby, And the thing is, you can embarrass somebody to death. I mean, these are not light things he's saying. And again, they're not... if it weren't for his unbelievable charm and charisma and his rapport, his incredible rapport with his audience, In a different context, this would be putting people very ill at ease. But you know what? If, as someone who's an FI user, I know about him that if it were in a different context, he might modify it somewhat, to fit in with the group, or he would choose his words carefully, or he would modify it somehow. But he would not drastically change the story if he felt such a story needed to be told in another setting. If he felt that his values were driving him to speak of it, he would do so, even if he knew it wasn't going to be well received. And that is introverted feeling. He says you can embarrass somebody to death. It's embarrassing to admit you're an alcoholic. It's embarrassing to wake up in your pee or someone else's pee. Again, a joke. It's not very funny. It is very funny the way he does it, but it's what it's talking about is real. It's not funny when that kind of thing's happening. It doesn't really matter. It's embarrassing. Now, I'm not absolving this woman of her behavior. I'm not. You have to be responsible for your actions. Sick or well, you have to be responsible for your actions. And you just have to be. All of us are accountable. So again, here he is. He's invoking all of these very deeply held values that he has. And he's speaking plainly of them, and he's making reference to them. And the imperative that he feels to abide by them. And he is making a specific case of, in this case, the underdog in this particular situation of Britney Spears. And he's exhorting this audience that just would like to laugh at her because that's what's accepted and that's what's automatic and that's what's often done. He's saying, stop being so automatic about it as a big blob of a group and think of this individual. This is a real person. This is an individual that you should relate to as an individual human being that you can relate to. The same way I am relating to you right now with the FI. And this is what is going on for her. So think about that. Again, it's a very evolved set of values that he is proposing here and that he's inviting the audience to, by way of example, which is the FI way to do it more often, inviting them to consider this. So, let's go. You can't beat it with this. You can't beat it with that. So he's going to, he closes off the monologue by saying, now I have found this. You can't beat it, this addiction stuff. You can't beat it with money. If you could beat this rap with money, rich people wouldn't die. You can't. And then he sort of, there's some ellipses. There's for me, only for me. And I speak, and he returns to this very individualistic thing again. I speak only for myself. So I've got to stress this to you. I have found that the only way I can deal with it is to find other people who have had similar experiences. So again, getting together with people other individuals who share this common problem and talk to them. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost a thing. And they're very, very easy to find. They're very near the front of the telephone book. And that's his sly, lovely way of getting across that he must be talking about AA, the 12-step program. And a central tenet of the 12-step programs are that you do not proselytize, you do not recruit, and you do not mention these groups in the media. You don't try and attract people into them. It's just a foundational thing about those groups. How they work is that you don't go around using the media to publicize them. That's a foundational tenet. And here he is, because that is a value that he must value in some way, the value of that group. By the way, again, just to show you that FI is not always FI is not about, it's not essential to FI that one is all out for themselves or just the people that they care about or whatever. No, FI is about defending the values. So if the values have to do with honoring or with considering the underdog or the exception or whatever, then the FI person is compelled to pay attention to that. But anyway, here he is in a way like getting the message of, it's kind of tricky. It's kind of imaginative. I would say that's some NE at work there. But he's kind of getting the message across, but while still honoring that value of not, going against that group's value, that group, what that group holds dear. And since he holds that group and its values dear, that's encompassed within his values, he's going to make sure that he does this in the proper way that honors those values, but still gets the message across. So I think that's an excellent example also of introverted feeling working in its relatively complicated, and very value-centered way to do something really positive. So there it is. I hope you enjoyed that monologue as I did and got something out of it. I think it's really quite something. And it's just a terrific example of introverted feeling in action, what it can look like and what it can do. and its positive aspects in the right context, and especially as being done by a lovely person such as this, Craig Ferguson, ENFP. So there, I look forward to the comments and reactions and counterpoints, whatever. And as usual, thank you very much for watching. Those of you who did, I really do appreciate it.